I always knew something was off from the very start. Even when I first walked into Claire's world, I had married a woman who was treasured beyond measure by her parents, Richard and Margaret, while I seemed to disappear into the background, like a shadow on the wall. In every conversation, every gathering, I felt like I was living in a world where my worth was defined only by how little I mattered. I convinced myself that it did not matter, that I was always the outsider, because my love for Claire was enough to keep me grounded. But as the years progressed, the small, sharp moments began to mount up, like broken glass under my feet. I observed calmly, while her parents complimented her every achievement, celebrating her every triumph. But my personal efforts? Seldom highlighted. Even when I managed a promotion or completed a significant assignment at work, I received nothing more than a quick nod from them, as if my successes were insignificant, contrasted against the continual radiance they rained upon her. I tried to tell myself that I did not need their permission, that what mattered was the life we were establishing together. Yet every holiday, dinner, every family event presented another painful reminder. Claire was their golden child, and I was the additional piece they tolerated, only out of convenience. I spent many evenings meditating over these memories, feeling the weight of every disparaging remark, every sideways glance, the subtle harshness of it all. This made me rethink my role and what should have been our secure sanctuary. I found myself increasingly alone in a marriage where love was intended to erase the searing neglect from the outside world. Last weekend, that pain came to a head in a way I had never experienced before. I had expected another routine day of quiet, another event where I was merely an afterthought. But that day when I arrived home, to see Claire smiling as if she were part of an inside joke, and her parents' voices dripping with disdain, I recognized that the cracks dividing our family had spread into chasms. I felt as if I were standing on the verge of a precipice, forced to confront the truth. I was living as a guest in my own life. In that moment, every slight, every snub converged into a single blazing fact. I was an outsider in the marriage I had once believed was formed on mutual respect and shared dreams. My heart ached with the sad realization that love, when imbalanced and underappreciated, might make a man feel invisible, even in the brightest light. I closed my eyes and drew a deep, shuddering breath. Silently, I promised that this sense of nothingness would no longer define who I was. I had reached the point where the burden of chronic neglect could no longer be carried in silence. Every word, every gesture that undermined my worth had led me to this decisive moment. Even as I stood there, wrestling with the stark truth of my insignificance, a calm determination began to ignite inside me. I knew that I deserved to be seen, to be appreciated, not just by the woman I loved, but by the family that had long pushed me into the background. As the day turned into night, I made a pledge to myself. I would no longer allow the shadows of others to dim the light of my own soul. I would fight to earn my proper place, not simply as Claire's spouse, but as a man worthy of recognition and care. And so, in that quiet, resolute moment, I embraced the fact of my own strength, even if it meant standing alone against the sea of apathy that had defined my history, neglect. I walked away with a heart sad yet resolute. Resolute that I would no longer be chained by the bonds of a family that valued convenience over actual connection. Today, the knock at my door was not only an intrusion but a turning point, a clear message that I deserved better, that I would no longer tolerate being treated as little more than an afterthought in a life that was rightfully mine. I sat in the solitude of my study, the weight of the previous night's incident still heavy in my memory. The room was dimly lit by a solitary lamp, casting long shadows on the walls, echoes of abandonment and hurt. As I stared blankly at a faded photograph of a happier time, images of past disappointments churned in my head. I could still hear Margaret's steady tone as she retold the events of that fateful evening. Her words, thick with the unspoken expectation that I should bear the burden of their thoughtless choices. Every sentence, every silence, told me that I had long been expected to carry obligations without so much as a word of gratitude. I recalled how she justified the unexpected dinner bill with an air of entitlement, as though I were compelled to pay for their lavish celebration simply because I was the one who managed the money. That demand cut deeper than any angry phrase. It was not just about money, it was about recognition. Recognition of a role I had never agreed to play. Over the years, I had sacrificed my own desires, trying to close the growing gap between us, seeking to prove my worth in a family where I was always secondary. Every family event was a silent lesson in invisibility, a reminder that my presence was accepted only when it was convenient. In the solitude of my study, I felt the crushing weight of every unheralded achievement, every ignored sacrifice. I remembered the long evenings spent, working, trying to build a future that would earn me respect, only to be met with casual indifference. Their words that morning were not meant to console. They were meant to remind me of a fact I had long tried to ignore. I was valued not for who I was, but for what I could provide. A flash of rage burned inside me, a slow, rising fire. I was done. The demand for money was not just an annoyance, it was a public declaration that I was nothing more than a means to an end. Every slight, every dismissive glance, every moment I had been made to feel lesser culminated in that single, terrible moment. In the muted light, I made a vow. I would no longer let my worth be defined by my bank balance. I would no longer remain silent while my value was measured in dollars. I deserved respect, not because I had paid for it with sacrifice, but because I was a person worthy of it. I envisioned a future where I was not shackled to the expectations of a family that had never truly welcomed me. A life where my choices, my goals, and my successes were celebrated, not exploited. The thought of independence filled me with a new sense of purpose. I could see the path ahead, not an easy one, but one that was finally mine. A future where I was no longer an afterthought, but the author of my own story. And in that quiet, determined moment, I opened my eyes and set my gaze on the future, resolved to change the narrative of my life.